Leah, we have another question on the right-hand side.
I just have a quick question. I was wondering how mechanical and elevator penthouses are taken into consideration with the building heights, whether they be the ones in the CBD, downtown south, or the heritage districts.
You mean in terms of the view corridors, for example?
Just
the
overall building height? Like if the building is going to be 425 feet, does that include the mechanical and elevator penthouses, or are there additional allowances for those?
The short answer is yes, they do. A mechanical building can block a view just as much as a floor of housing. So it's about having no building go above the view corridor line. Of course, we're not talking about buildings within view corridors, but yeah, we don't do it in a way where you go to the top cornice line of the building and then you're allowed to do things above. It's any portion of the building penetrating.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a question here.
Yeah, Kevin, you mentioned each building will have a public consultation process, but once the decision's been made with these, or if the decision's made on Friday for the additional height, what does that public consultation process actually look like? Because once the decision is made, what influence do we actually have?
Well, you have influence at multiple stages in a process, and we're at the policy stage of a process now. So you're quite right to take this policy stage very, very seriously. We're not being flippant and saying, don't worry, there's another process. Because what this policy process does is enable consideration. Without this process, staff would say, no, you're not allowed to go that high, period. Policy doesn't allow you to. So this would allow consideration of that. It would, in a first instance, enable heights of that type. But then what we do at the rezoning stage, when we actually have a specific building design to contemplate, is look at everything from private views, for example, and shadowing of specific impacts. As an example, when Kevin showed the Burrard Toyota site and showed that it could go to 500 feet without casting shadow on the sidewalk, the more detailed answer is you'd have to sculpt the top of the building to make sure that it doesn't cast a shadow on the opposite sidewalk. So there's a more detailed design review and shadow analysis at the zoning stage. So we get to a finer level of detail, and the public has an ability to influence those finer level of details. Well. Yes and no. In a first instance, you're allowed to contemplate that height. But that's why we tend to use words like generally 150, for example, because once you get to the more detailed level, the answer might be 160 feet. The answer might be 140 feet when you look at the actual urban design impacts. But, as I said to council when they asked the question, could it mean 250 feet? No. There's always a little bit of give. The way that we interpret council direction, when they say something like generally 150 feet, you take that pretty seriously. So it might be a few feet above or below, even a floor above or below. 10%, 5%? Not really, because we look at impact. We prefer not to take a mathematician's approach to it. What we'd rather do is say, let's look at the urban design impacts. And if you do that, 3 feet might be very impactful in one case, 10 feet might be not in another. So we tend to really focus on urban design impact, things like shadowing, etc.
Okay, thank you. We have a comment in the back. We'll come to your questions momentarily.
These are a couple of questions about consultation. In December, a council member was quoted as saying there was a strong support for this policy change, and I think that came to about 61%. And that came out of the 3 open houses that were held. And when I looked at the report, what it said is roughly 44 people of the 72 people that filled out the survey has supported this policy change. Roughly that was 14% of the 500 people that attended the 3 events. This is not exactly a substantial sample. So it raised the question, what was the extensive consultation process undertaken by the city? And what did it include in addition to the 3 open houses? But there's a second part to this, and that is, as you know, the West End is very, very concerned about any changes to the current zoning. And we were quite surprised to find out in that rather convoluted map that was presented that suddenly Burrard and Davie, the beginning of the Davie Village, could be subject to 350 or 375 square feet. It's raised a lot of concerns. We think it should be out of the scope of this particular study, and we would like extensive consultation prior to making any changes in that regard.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go back to your original question.
Well, actually, I'll start with the last part first,
Okay.
and then Kevin can talk more about the consultation. In the context of the Burrard and Davie intersection specifically, that was one of the areas where I wanted to make sure that correct information was out there. There's been the suggestion that this proposal would radically change that intersection. So it's important to know what is allowed right now under the existing policy approach. The gas station site at that corner, because it actually has other view corridors passing over it, it's limited to about 175 feet in height. Under zoning, it could go higher than that, but because the view corridors pass over it, it can't. So it's limited to 175 feet. But for anyone who thinks this proposal was allowing a tall building, the answer is a tall building is already allowed on that site, up to about 175 feet. Across the road on the community garden site, it doesn't have a zoning, a view corridor passing over at least most of the site. Actually, in this particular site, there's a piece of that property that has a view corridor passing over it. But there's enough that doesn't have a view corridor passing over it that you could do a tower on a portion of that site. And that site could allow a tower under existing zoning, under existing policy of 350 feet. That's already allowed. So the suggestion that we're creating tall building potential is not quite accurate because it's already allowed. Now, what we are specifically talking about doing in the context of what Kevin showed is raising that 350 feet by 25 feet up to 375 to make it sort of balance out in a relationship, a junior and senior tower relationship with the Burrard Toyota site. So it's very important for you to know exactly what's being proposed. There is a height increase being proposed on the community garden site, but only 25 feet. If council chose to not do that, under the existing policy, you could still do a building of 350 feet on that site currently. In terms of the broader public consultation, the one thing I'll say before Kevin answers is I take the point and I agree. We tend to emphasize the results of the comment sheets. And as you can imagine, you can have 200 people come out to an event and maybe only 30 or 40 of them take the time to fill out the comment sheet. So we tell council what those comment sheet results are, but I take the point that there can sometimes be the danger of overemphasizing those. They are not a survey. They are not representative. They're representative of the people who filled out the comment sheet. They're not representative of the people who came to the meeting, and they're not representative of the overall public. On the other hand, we did a survey as part of the tall building, the view corridor review. That was a representative survey because it was a representative sample, random sample, telephone survey that drove people to a website. That is a survey that is considered representative to the broader public. And it's always important for us to make a distinction between those two things.
I'll just add that, and I agree with everything you said, and I agree with that it was a small number of people who filled out the surveys, which is why I didn't emphasize that in the report, and actually why I put all the verbatim comments into an appendix, because I wanted council to read it. In terms of the overall consultation, we started this back in, God, it was like 2009 in June, and we did 4 open houses at the time in different parts of the city on just initially, what do you think of views? Should we still protect them? What's important to the view? Try to get a sense of priority for view protection, what people value in views. Do the view corridors still make sense? That's when we did the statistically valid survey, et cetera, as well. What we heard is that, yes, views are very important. They're still important. We value views to the mountains. And one thing that was indicated in the surveys, too, is that people thought the narrow views, the small ones, like from Charleston Park to the Lions, don't touch them. They're too small. But about 50% of the people, and this is included up on the website, it's done by Synovate, they've got the survey results up on our website, said, for the broader views, like the Queen Elizabeth view, maybe a tower or two, but no more. Not to overwhelm the view, but to enhance the skyline might be appropriate. Very split, and that split still continues today, which is why I expect this room is full. I'm not kidding that it's strongly supported. We're split out there in terms of the general public. What we did then was took that back and brought 4 concepts forward about the view strengthening, new views, a suggestion that a few towers be allowed into the view quarters. Basically, those 4 concepts to strengthen the views, et cetera. And we heard strong support for strengthening the views, adding new views, et cetera. Once again, new towers into the view quarters was very split, split down the middle almost. So what council did is decided we want to err on the side of view protection. And they said, we don't want to put towers into the view quarters. Go out there and come back with additional tower sites that are outside of these protected views. And that's what led us up to this past October, where we brought those proposals back out for another 3 open houses, tried to engage people. There's obviously lots of media, and that's where we are today. So I wanted to give you a sense of how things built and we learned and heard over time in the public consultation.